This is episode number 153. Today we're featuring the incredible watercolor plein air artist, Raleigh Kinney.
This is the PleinAir Podcast with Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. In the PleinAir Podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called plein air, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plein air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Rhoads.
Thank you, Jim Kipping, and welcome everybody to the PleinAir Podcast. I'm Rhoads, and I'm happy to have you here today. I appreciate you listening because I know how busy and crazy it is around Christmas time, getting ready for Christmas, not much time left. And I just got back from a trip to Denver to select spots where we're going painting for the Plein Air convention in May. We've got some incredible spots picked out. You're going to love painting there. Also, I'd forgotten how nice the hotel was, and that's kind of cool because it's going to be our biggest plein air convention yet and a really nice facility. And Denver isn't so shabby. It's really beautiful around there. I think there's only like 135 seats left, maybe a couple more than that. And that's not many when you consider that we're still selling till May. So if you really are thinking about going, you probably ought to get that done. When I was in Denver, I had a chance to visit Daniel Sprick. He's got an amazing studio there. We hung out, had dinner in the studio. He actually made dinner for me, which was kind of nice. And of course, we talked about art. I got to see a lot of his paintings personally and up close, which I hadn't really had a chance to do yet. His plein air work is just beyond amazing. Even though he's kind of known, famous, world famous as a figurative artist, his plein air work is just incredible. And I think you're going to want to see him on stage and learn how he does it. He's also a really nice and giving guy, too. So I was looking around at all his stuff. You know, he's got, like me, piles of junk everywhere. He's pretty organized, much more organized than I am. Anyway, there was an easel brush clip right there with all his stuff. I'm seeing those things everywhere. That's kind of fun. Well, maybe not fun, but it's cool. And you could probably still get them for Christmas if you order right away. Check it out at easelbrushclip.com, the cool tool for artists. Coming up after the interview, I'll be answering art marketing questions in the Marketing Minute. Marketing Minute will soon be getting its own podcast, too, after the first of the year. It'll be here on the PleinAir Podcast, of course, as it always is, but it's going to have its own podcast for people who maybe have never listened to the PleinAir Podcast. Shame on them, right? Well, not everybody's into plein air yet, but I'm trying to change that. Hey, let's get right to this interview with Raleigh Kinney. Raleigh Kinney, welcome to the PleinAir Podcast.
Well, thank you very much.
Hey, man, this is fun to finally connect with you. We were just talking before we started recording, and I don't think you and I have seen each other since the Plein Air Painters of America show in Lake Tahoe. What year do you think that would have been?
Oh, my, oh, my, oh, my. Let's see. That would have had to been about... I'd say about 1978, somewhere in that range.
I think that's too.
It would be way too early.
I wasn't even born yet.
No, that's right. No, that's right. About 1998, I think.
Well, I'll tell you, I can remember exactly what was going on at the time, and I remember I brought bags promoting Plein Air Magazine with a bunch of art goodies in them for each of the artists at the event that week. It was the first year it was in Lake Tahoe. I think it was there 2 years. And
that's right.
That's when I was essentially announcing that I was launching Plein Air Magazine. So it's been at least 15 years. Yep,
I remember that very, very well. And I tell you, the thing that I remember about that Plein Air event is that they had the big marquee outside with Plein Air Painters of America and some other information on it. And you would think that we were a headliner that night.
Well, you were.
Yeah, it was. Oh, it was fantastic. Yeah, what a wonderful experience that was for us. That was just great.
And I don't know if it was year one or year two, but Tony Bennett played.
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah.
And he put all the plein air painters right down in front.
Yep. Yeah. And we got to paint with Tony. So that was
That's
fun.
correct.
So I
Yep.
don't know if I've ever told this story on the podcast. You probably never heard it, but because of that day 15 years ago, I'm sitting in my office. This is about 5 years ago, probably. I'm sitting in my office and the phone rings and it says, "Eric, Tony Bennett." And I said, "Yeah, right. And I'm the Queen of England." He said, "No, it's Tony Bennett." And he said, "I'm coming to Austin. I'll be there in an hour. Meet me at the Four Seasons. We're going painting."
For crying out loud.
So I said to my assistant, I said, "I'm taking the day off." And so Tony and I went out behind the Four Seasons there on the river, and we painted all day. And the stories are so fabulous because he's talking about people who are iconic to us, right? And they're just buddies of his.
Oh, yeah.
You know, Christmas with Ella Fitzgerald for 20 years in a row, and Thanksgiving, and I was telling him that Prince Charles was a subscriber to PleinAir magazine, and he says, "Oh, nice kid. I held him as a baby. His mom's a cool chick."
Yeah, I'll tell you what. He was one of the nicest gentlemen you could ever meet. Yeah, the short time that we got a chance to talk to him and play around a little bit with him, he was just the nicest fellow.
He really
We
is.
enjoyed that so much. Yeah.
Yeah,
so
really a sweet man. And I ended up, he invited me back, and we painted 2 full days together. Then I went to the show that night and went backstage, and we continue to be in touch. So that's been fun. But anyway, we didn't. That just is a coincidence. So what have you been doing the last 15 years?
Well, I'll tell you what. I started out really long time ago, and we came down here in Arizona in 1980. But before that, I'll have to tell you a little bit about. I was an art teacher. I'd been teaching about 15 years, maybe 12 or 13 to start with, and I got it. I was actually a printmaker, a lot like Steve Doherty. I talked to Steve Doherty, and he said, "I was a printmaker." He said, "That's what I did. I was a printmaker." And I met him when we were up at the Grand Canyon. But anyway, that's what I was involved in, was in printmaking, and then also pottery. I was a wheel throwing pottery and stuff like that. And in the summertime when I wasn't teaching, we would do art festivals in Minneapolis and all around. One time we were in Fargo, North Dakota, and we were doing a show at a big mall there in Fargo. And right next to me, I was showing pots primarily, also some prints and things from printmaking. There was a elderly lady there, not too elderly, maybe in her 60s. She's pretty young now by comparison. But anyway, her name was Olive George. And she had some of the most beautiful watercolors. I just could not believe it, because I had taken a watercolor class in college, and I liked it pretty well, but it wasn't something I thought I would be doing for the rest of my life. But anyway, Olive George was there, and she said, "You know what?" I said, "I've never seen watercolors like this. I think these are absolutely gorgeous." And she said, "Well, she said, I've been taking watercolor workshops." And I said, "Well, who have you been taking them with?" And she said, "Ed Whitney." I said, "Ed Whitney?" "Yeah, he lives over on the East Coast." But she said, "I have a girlfriend and myself. We go over there and we take classes, or we take a workshop from him." "Oh, we've done it a couple of years." I said, "Well, that's fantastic." She said, "He's coming to Minnesota. He's going to be up at Grand Rapids, and he's teaching a workshop up there." I said, "You've got to be kidding me." And she said, "No, he's coming." And I said, "When is it?" Well, she told me the time, and it was right after school was out in June. So, by golly, we packed up the family, Darlene, and my wife, and our 2 boys, and we headed up to Grand Rapids right after school was out. And I took my first workshop from Ed Whitney, watercolor. Nice. And what a gentleman, what a nice man. And anyway, that's the way it started. And after that, it was a yearly deal. I started working in the basement. I'd go down the basement after school at night, and I'd go down the basement, I'd paint watercolor. And then the next year, George Post came from California, and I took a workshop from George Post, and he was the funniest guy, because it was that time, it was in the 60s when, all the beatniks were around and the hippies and all that sort of thing. And he came and did a demonstration. He had a big gold chain hanging around his neck and kind of a loose shirt on. And he had like shower shoes on. Came out and he did this fantastic painting. And he was, and his palette looked like a mess. It was just a mess. I couldn't figure out how in the world did he find the colors on that. But anyway, he did the most beautiful painting. And I thought, my gosh, this is fantastic. So anyway, a whole series of workshops the next few years. Ed Whitney, Zoltan Szabo came out, took 2 or 3 workshops from Zoltan, Frank Webb, Charles Reed, Robert E. Wood. All these guys came to Grand Rapids, Minnesota to teach in the summertime, and they do it like a 5-day workshop. Every one of those workshops I took, every June after class was out, head up there with the camper, and we'd go up there and paint for 5 days on location. What an experience. What an absolute experience. But it fired me up so much about painting that, and then I thought, gee, I wonder if I could do this full time. It would be and I had gotten a lot of encouragement from some of the painters, some of the instructors that had come up there, and in particular, Zoltan Szabo. Zoltan said to me one day, he said, I think you could make a living painting watercolor.
Wow, that's a compliment.
I said, you got to be kidding me. And he said, no. He said, I really think you could make a living doing that. And besides that, he said, you teach also. He says, so it would be a double-barreled thing. You could do that. So I was thinking about that. Well, in the meantime, he moved to Arizona. He and his wife moved down here to Arizona. And he invited me to come down and spend Christmas vacation from our school in St. Cloud, Minnesota, to come down here and spend a week with him and his wife and my wife and family. So we came down and spent a week down here, and we painted every day. Zoltan and I would go out and paint on location, and I thought to myself, Arizona, wow. What a beautiful place to paint. The mountains and the whole business. We went out every day and painted, and it was the most wonderful 2 weeks that we spent down here I can ever remember. And so that kind of sealed it. Anyway, we went home after that Christmas vacation, and I said to my wife, I said, what would you think about moving to Arizona and I paint full time? And she thought, maybe this is midlife crisis.
That's a tough conversation to have, isn't it?
Yeah. So I've been teaching 15 years, and I thought, well, it is time for something else. Anyway, she said, well, let me think about it. So anyway, over a period of several days, I finally convinced her maybe what we should do, I'd take a year's leave of absence. We'd sell our house in St. Cloud. We'd move down here, and we'd buy a house down here. And if things just fell flat, then we could always sell the house in Arizona and move back to St. Cloud with a year's leave of absence. So anyway, I convinced her. So in 1980, we moved to Arizona. With the boys,
you must be a good salesperson, because that's a tough sale.
It is a very, very tough sale. And, I thought about that many times since we left. And many times I thought to myself, did I really make a big mistake in doing that? But that's when you're in the down times, and when you're in the good times, you think, I did make the right decision. I made the right decision to do what we wanted to do. Okay. And so that's kind of where the new adventure started, actually.
I want to probe that for just a second. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to go back to that, because I think that was an important point that you made about you have these down times and you're having these doubts. There are a lot of people who are listening right now who are either going through that, having their doubts, or wanting to kind of take the leap and go forward and try to go out on their own. What would your best advice be for those people who are like thinking about it but haven't done it yet?
I don't know if there's any one one advice that you could give somebody that would be sort of a universal thing. But I read a lot of various things, and when I find things that are interesting and relate to me personally or to what I'm doing, I'll sometimes write those down in my sketchbook. And I ran across something by Mike Rowe. He's a TV star of this Dirty Jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is something that I got out of the article as I was reading it, and I wrote it down. And this is what it says. I got lucky and met some people who suggested a different path. We are not a product of our circumstances, but a product of our choices. And it just hit me. I thought, that's exactly what happened to me. That's exactly what happened to me. I got encouragement. I got somebody to say, you know what? You're a good painter. I think you could paint full time. And that encouragement, I think, from anyone, and I don't care if it's a high class instructor or if it's just somebody you're taking a little class from, and they say to you, you know what, you really are getting the idea, and I think you're going to be a great painter. Those kinds of words, I think, mean so much, and I think that's what happened to me.
I think that's a really great quote and a very good thing to talk about, because it's so important. And you were clinging to 3 or 4 little words that this guy probably said in passing, didn't even think about it, probably wasn't intentionally trying to be encouraging. He just, he spoke what was on his mind, and that led you to a whole new life. And,
it did.
And
yeah.
I think that, I've been writing in my Sunday Coffee about certain things, and one of the things I wrote about recently is what I call the catalyst. And there's usually, when we take a leap forward, there's usually a catalyst. And that catalyst might be somebody like that who just gives you a little bit of encouragement, or it might be somebody who gives you an opportunity. Maybe it's a gallery, or maybe it's a show, or maybe it's an advertisement or some other such thing. But the idea is that you got to keep your mind open and be open to those ideas, because your first reaction to those things, at least my first reaction, it used to be, was, oh no, I'm not good enough.
Right. That's exactly right. I'll have to tell you what happened when we got up to Arizona, because I didn't know anybody. Zoltan moved. When we got down here, Zoltan and his wife, they moved out to North Carolina. So here I am. I'm down here with my family. We bought a house down here. And so I did what we did back in Minnesota. I started doing mall shows. And I also was doing a little teaching in a couple of art galleries. And that wasn't paying very much. I was getting like $5 for each student. I'd maybe have 3 students or something like that. And I'd drive downtown Phoenix to the art gallery, and I would teach down there and drive home. And then some days I'd make $5, if there's only 1 or 2 people show up for a class. And so anyway, I also started doing mall shows at the same time. And I'll have to tell you what happened to me. We were doing a mall show in Scottsdale. And a fellow walked by my paintings, and he came back and he said, wow, he said, you really have great paintings. And I said, yeah, I've been working at it for quite some time. And he said, how would you feel about, he said, can you demonstrate? And I said, oh yeah, I do some teaching. He says, would you like to come down during a Christmas break, during Christmas holidays, and set up in our department store right at the escalator, right at the top of the escalator? And he said, you can put up a display of your artwork, and then you can. And I had a little demo mirror that I had at that time, about a 40-inch demo mirror. And he said, you could bring your demo mirror, and he said you could set up there and do demonstrations, and people can come by and see your work. And he said, we'll pay you so much an hour, and if you sell something, we'll take 10% 10% commission. I thought, wow, what a deal. I said, I sure would. And he said, okay. So that's what we did. Darlene and I would go down and set this thing up on the weekend, and I would stand up there and paint, and I met so many artists, and I've met so many people that were interested in watercolor painting in that short period of time. I was so dumbfounded, and then it went pretty good. I got paid, and then I sold a few paintings, and so it was going along really well. So then his name was Arisby, Mr. Arisby, yeah. And he was the advertising manager for Diamonds at that time, Diamonds Department Stores, which was actually part of, it was a Hudson out of Minneapolis. What is it?
Right. Yeah, Hudson Bay Company.
Yeah, not Hudson Bay, Dayton Hudson. Dayton Hudson Corporation.
Yeah, same company, yeah.
Yeah, anyway, he said, well, how'd you like to go to Las Vegas and do the same thing in Las Vegas at one of our stores there? So I said, I'd love to. So we did the same thing. I did demonstrations. So I met so many people who are interested in watercolor in particular, and also whether I was going to be teaching or not. Would you be teaching anything? So that opened a door. That opened a door for me, and I met some people here in the Phoenix area. There was a group called 22 by 30 that was kind of a watercolor club, and they invited me to join, and through that, I made some more connections, and at the same time, I was still doing mall shows, and a lot of the people that would see my work at the mall shows asked me if I would come and do a workshop for them. So I started doing some out of town workshops. I'd go down to Tucson and do a workshop down there, and various other towns around the Phoenix area, and as well as in the Phoenix area itself. And so what happened? I think one of the gals that was in a 22 by 30 club said to me, would you be interested in coming over to Catalina Island and doing a workshop over there? She said, I was over there last year, and they're trying to get together a group of painters that would like to paint over there. I said, I don't think so. I don't think I'll do that. And so that year went by. Same thing next year. She said, this is your last chance. She said, I really would like to have you come over to Catalina and do a workshop over there. So I said, okay. I said, I'll do it. So Darlene and I took my paints and so on, and over we went. And the gal that was instrumental in getting me to go to Catalina, and she is now, I think Mary Arndt has got to be, 90?
Yep.
I suppose.
Maybe 91.
Maybe 91. And anyway, she was the one that was interested in getting me to go to Catalina. And so I went there and had a great time, did the workshop. Then I was invited back the next year. And at that time, it was just the beginning of PleinAir Painters. And the gal that started that PleinAir Painters, Denise, yep. She was just a wonderful person, and she said, "We're starting this group of PleinAir painters who, painting on location kind of thing. And would you be interested?" I said, "Absolutely." And so I became a member, and it was kind of it was called SAAP. And I don't know what the SA. I can't remember what the SA was, but it's PleinAir Painters was a PAP on the end, and. So that was the beginning of PAPA. That was the beginning of PleinAir Painters of America. And I was a member up until, the last 3 years or so. We went almost 20 years to Catalina. Every fall, September, we'd go to Catalina, and we did 5-day workshop out there, and we would trade for a golf cart. We'd trade a painting for a golf cart, and we'd trade a painting for our lodging. And that's the way it went for year after year after year. And we had some of the best shows in the ballroom out there, what they called the casino, and that big building out on a point. Some of the best shows that I've ever been in.
And I would say probably some of the most financially successful shows in history, even to this day. And I was there towards the end. I think I was there either the last or second to last year they did it in Catalina. I remember there were fires in LA, and it was very foggy, so to speak. And I remember watching. They had the crowd cordoned off, and they opened up the doors all at once, and people were not allowed to take their cameras in, and they rushed to the top of that ramp, and they just went into this giant room with all these easels with the lights on them, and they're just like buying like crazy. And I think they did $300,000 sales that day in about the first hour. It just was a phenomenon, and thanks to Roy Rose and the people in Catalina who really made that happen. And what a wonderful time in history. And that really was, for me, very early stage inspiration for PleinAir magazine. And you know, I had announced it by I think I had announced it by then, or maybe it came a year later. But it was that when I saw that, I thought, well, you know, we need to turn this into a nationwide movement. This is big. This has big potential. Yep.
And you did the right thing. You really did the right thing. And I'll tell you, one little episode, it's so fun to think about these things. I remember the ladies taking off their high heels so that they could run up the ramp faster. They were down below, and we were coming in. Of course, the artist was coming in early, so we were going by all these people. And I noticed that these women had their high heels off. And I asked one of the ladies, I said, "What are you taking your high heels off?" "Oh," she said, "we can get up the ramp faster that way." So, and then another episode, it was so funny. I had a nice vertical painting of would be the yacht club, but I painted it from almost on up high, looking right down on the yacht club, and I had some boats out in front, some couple of sailboats out in front with reflection on the bottom and everything, and then the yacht club kind of from the top down, and beautiful little painting. Anyway, I had it sitting on this easel with the light on it, and this fellow come running by, and he said, "I want that painting," and another guy grabbed the slip off him, and he said, "I got the slip." Oh. So the guy with the slip got the painting. Yeah. Anyway, well, what a fun memory to think back on those kinds of things.
So I'm curious. You know, there's this watercolor discussion that I'm sure goes on at every dinner with any watercolorist. You know, the old debate about, you know, do galleries value watercolor as much as oil? Do collectors value it? You know, the glass issue, all that stuff. You've stuck with it, and you've made a very handsome career doing it. What are your thoughts on all of that, and how do you help people overcome some of those issues?
Well, this is what I've done, and I've been doing this for the last 10 years. I decided that what I would start doing is mounting my watercolors on a panel. You can buy watercolor paper that's already paneled, but what I would do is I would go ahead and do my painting, and I would mount it on a panel that would fit a standard frame without a mat. Okay? So I started doing that, and then I had seen when we were up in Colorado, we had a place in Colorado, so we did a lot of shows up in Colorado in the summertime, but I saw a wonderful exhibit of paintings, and I can't remember the fellow's name, but he's a very well-known watercolor painter, but no glass. And I thought, this is fantastic. Big, beautiful paintings and no glass, and you could really see them well. There's no reflection. You could see how the artist has used his brush, the whole business. And I thought, man, that's the way to go. Anyway, it just so happened I ran into a person that had taken a workshop from him, and that he had given her, or given everybody in a workshop, a formula for coating watercolors. And so I asked her about that, and she said, "Yeah, I've got that. I'll give it to you." So anyway, this is the way he did it, and I kind of varied it a little bit. But he was using like a UV resist spray on the paintings. And he would spray it on, or I can't remember whether he brushed it on or sprayed it on. But anyway, he would put that on first, and then he would put a very, what I would call a varnish over the top. After the UV was dry, he would put a varnish over the top. It was kind of a satin varnish, so it actually enhanced the colors of the watercolor because it looked like more like a wet watercolor. So you'd have these wonderful subtle passages that looked gray, but then when you put the coating on it, you would suddenly see a little bit of red and a little bit of blue in there and a little bit of violet within that grayed area, which made it a lot more visually entertaining, I thought. And so anyway, I got this formula, and so I started doing, and I varied it a little bit because I started using a spray rather than brushing. And I would spray on a UV resist, about 3 coats of UV resist. This was after it was mounted on a panel. And then I would put about 3 coats of Kmar varnish after it was dry. I would put about 3 coats of Kmar varnish over the top. And you can get the varnish either in a matte or you can get it in a gloss. But what I would do is I would use a gloss, and then I would take the matte and just go over it slightly just to give it sort of a satin finish.
Did you say Damar?
Kmar.
Kmar. What's the difference between? I don't know Kmar. What's the difference between?
It's a Krylon product.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Anyway, so that's what I've been doing for about 10 years. And the thing that I found is it enhances the color. It brings the color up very nicely. You don't have the weight of the glass. If you're doing a big piece, you don't have the weight of the glass. You don't have the reflection. I lost so many sales from people saying to me, you know what, I love your watercolors, but we have so many windows in our home that the reflection really distracts from the paintings. And I said, I can understand that. I know exactly what you're talking about. Now, you can get non-glare glass, but you still get a sheen on it. You know, there's always, you look at it at an angle and there's always a sheen on it. So you can't really get a nice clear look at the image. So I started doing that, and I'll tell you what, Eric, you could put that painting next to an oil painting and it would compete with an oil painting any day.
Well, I remember at that show in Tahoe seeing your work, and you were doing that at that time.
That's correct.
And I remember remarking it, and you did it, and I think Mary was doing something similar. And I remember remarking that it was so refreshing to see a watercolor without a frame, and that the colors were so rich. And you know, for those of us who do some of the shows and have to carry all this stuff with us, frames, and you know, it's tough to carry glass, and you know, it's not a very friendly surface when it comes to dropping it. So I think you know, you may have come up with something that may have been worth the whole podcast right there. Well,
I tell you what, Eric, it's been a great boon for us because you don't have to cut mats. All you do is you mount your panel, make sure that your panel, and what I use for the glue to mount my watercolor panel is a medium, like a matte medium, acrylic matte medium.
Yeah.
And it is absolutely the best glue there is. I'll coat the board, and I'll very carefully dampen the watercolor. You can dampen it on the front, dampen it on the back, and as you know, once watercolor is dry, you can roll it with a paper towel, and you won't get any paint off. But anyway, then after it's dry, I would dampen both sides of it in preparation to putting it on the panel. The panel already has the medium on it. And then I would take the watercolor and very carefully place it on the medium, on the board, and I actually used a rolling pin, a big rolling pin. I'd lay a piece of paper over the top of it to make sure that I didn't get anything messed up on the painting itself. I'd lay a piece of paper over the top of it and roll it both ways, make sure it was adhered very nicely to the board, not hard, didn't have to roll it real hard, and then take the paper off, and if there was any medium that had squeezed out around the outside edge, I wiped that all off, put a new piece of paper on, and put a blotter on top of the paper, and then put some heavy weight on, or a rigid weight on top of that. And on top of that, then I would leave it overnight, take the weight off of it in the morning, take the paper off, take the blotter off, and you can see that the moisture had kind of come through the paper and into the blotter, but the watercolor was adhered beautifully to the board.
Do you ever mount the paper to a board in advance and then paint right on it?
Yes. Yeah. And I do that when I go out on location. It works well because you have a rigid board to work on. Like I'll do 11 by 14s or 12 by 16s, and I'll take a couple of boards along with me. They're nice because you can put them in your pack. and I always put them with a piece of foam core on the facing of it so I don't damage the surface of it. And I'll stick them in my pack and take them out on location, and they work great because you can pop them out of there and set them up on your easel, and they're rigid. I just put a couple clips on it to hold it in place, and you're off. So it works just like an oil painter.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Well, tell me a little bit about you. You've done a lot of shows over the years. Are you still doing those? Are you pretty much just going out on your own? What's the story today?
Well, since I left PAPA, the thing that happens, of course, is age gets in the way. And it was getting harder and harder to travel and to set up for these plein air events and things like that. So we're sticking fairly close to home, Darlene and I, and our boys, of course, are growing, and I've left by now. But so we do a few local shows. We do one that's coming up in January. We do that. And I've got a gallery out in Carefree that has some of my paintings. And so I do a little of that. But the thing that I have found I really enjoy teaching, and so I have a studio attached to our home. We built it when we moved in here 12 years ago or something like that. We built about a 600 square foot studio on the side of the house, and I have room for about 10 students. And so in the winter time, like now coming up, I've got the first one coming up second one coming up next week already. I do a 3-day workshop, and I call them inside-out workshops. And we do one day in. The first day is in. I do a workshop. I do a demonstration. I work with the people individually. They bring in an idea or a sketch or something that they'd like to paint. After I do the demo and talk through it, tell them my colors and why I use certain colors and go through the whole routine, then I go around and work with them individually, and that's the first day. And then we talk about going outside and what we're going to need, what they're going to have to bring with them and that sort of thing. And a lot of times they're a little apprehensive about going out and painting on location. But I have some students or some people that have been coming, for I suppose the last 10 years probably since we built the studio. And so they'll tell the other people too, the new people, and they'll say, "Oh, it's a great time. We have a good time out there." So that's what we'll do on the second day. We'll leave here in the morning, and we're maybe within a half hour of really good painting sites around here. So we'll go out to the Superstitions, paint on the Superstitions one day. Another day we'll go down. There's an old western mining town, and we'll go down there and we'll paint man-made structures. And another time we'll go down along the river, the Salt River that runs right through the valley here, and we'll paint along the river with the mountains in the background. It's absolutely, and in the spring of the year we have these wonderful desert flowers, just colorful. The desert is just covered with flowers, and this year in particular will be another good year. We've had a lot of rain, so we'll have a lot of flowers. So we'll go out and paint flowers. But that's what we do. And then the third day, we come back, the sketch that they have done the day before on location, they bring that back to the studio, they set up, and then I do another demonstration, and then they do their painting based on what they wanted to do from the day before, or sometimes they just work on the one that they started on the first day. So that's the way the 3-day workshops go.
I think, I've been kind of trying to figure out what's the right training process for people learning plein air, whether it's watercolor, oil, or acrylic, or gouache, or whatever, pastel.
Right.
And I think that really the best possible thing is to be indoors and kind of learn how to handle things for outdoors while you're indoors, so you're not getting frustrated when you're out there the first time.
Right, and you can explain it. I mean, you have time, and you can set up the easel and say, "This is my easel that I use when I'm on location. I'll show you how it works." And then I even have a cardboard box that I made up that has the top cut at an angle with kind of a little lip at the lower end. It's cut at about a 30-degree angle or so. And I said, you know what? If you don't have an easel, all you need is a camping stool and a cardboard box like this. And I show them the box. I said, you can put your gear inside of the box. And you can actually bring that out to the painting site, because we don't paint a long way from the car. We're not hauling stuff for a long ways. So I said, you can take that, set it on the ground, put your board against that, and now you've got it at a slight angle, and now you can set your paints and things on the ground right beside you, and you can paint on it. And some of them do that, but most of them wind up with some sort of an easel or something like that.
Your paintings, to me, and this is meant to be a compliment, I hope it comes across, they have the sense of stained glass, in the sense that there's a luminosity. How do you get that? How do you get that sense of, is it layering? Is it transparent color? What do you use?
Yeah, actually, that's really a good compliment, because basically that's what you're looking for, is that looking through the paint at the white paper behind. And so I think that comparison is stained glass, I think, is an excellent comparison. But yes, and I do it. I try to do it as simply as I can, and I get caught up in a lot of detail sometimes, which really frustrates me. But what I try to do is I try to lay out the basic shapes on the paper first. I'll take a pencil, I'll mark the basic shapes, and then when I do my first layer, I'll use my lightest set of colors. And I do that, probably, and I save the whites where I want to save the whites. I just paint around them. And incidentally, I'm working on a damp piece of paper, not wet, but a damp surface. So if I have a rigid board, as we had talked about earlier, I'll dampen that surface before I start that first set of colors. Now that gives me a lot of soft edges.
Are you doing a drawing first?
A very simple drawing on the paper with pencil. Very simple drawing. Your major shapes. Now, I've already got a little black and white that I've done preliminarily, a little black and white that shows me my values. So I have that right alongside. So that's basically, and what I've done is I've captured the light. So the light has been frozen in that little preliminary. So I know where my lights and my darks are going to be, and even if the light changes when I'm painting on location, if the light changes, I still have that little preliminary monochromatic sitting right next to me, so I know where I'm going to be. That's what I'm after.
I'm not very good at watercolor, I've got to admit, and the one thing that I find fascinating about watercolor artists who are good is that this ability to mentally work in reverse. Knowing, if I needed a light, I'd probably wait to the last minute and lay that light in over everything else, or else, but I'm not necessarily leaving a white space. And you almost have to do that.
Yeah, well, you have to plan it. I think you have to plan where that white space is going to be. And for me, what I try to do is at least pick out a pathway, a way for the viewer to get in and out of that painting. So I try to pick out a pathway if I can, and then somewhere within that painting, I would really like to see a focal point or a major center of interest. And so you can lead them in, and you can kind of show them where that big center of interest is, which is really the point of maybe biggest shapes, strongest contrasts, and then you work from there, you work back out again. So that's what I strive for, and I don't always accomplish it, but that's what I strive for when I'm developing a painting. But yes, first layer, and that's on a scale of 1 to 10, that's maybe no more than a value. If 10 is black, that first layer is probably no more than a value 3, value 4 at the most. And then the middle set of values will determine your shapes. So that's what that first set of values you can almost throw it on anywhere, and except for your white areas. And then that second layer, what you've done is you've mellowed the surface of the paper with that first layer. So then the second layer tells us the shapes within that set of first painting layer. And you should, in fact, sometimes, after that second layer of color goes down, that second layer of value, which should say from about a 4 to about a 6 or 7, that's your middle range. Sometimes you look at it after that middle range, you say, hey, I don't even have to put any darks in there. I like what it is right now. It's very soft and very fresh, and maybe I'll just leave it. So sometimes you just work with 2 layers. But if you want to put in some stronger, darker details, some of your smallest shapes, then that's the last layer that I put down. And that's usually near where my focal point is, my center of interest.
And that's when you make all the mistakes and add too much detail, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So, Raleigh, how many years since you left full-time teaching and have been a full-time artist? How many years now?
40 years.
Really, 40 years. So,
Yeah.
for the people listening, help them save some of the pain of those 40 years. Give them a little bit of advice. Any kind of advice. It could be career advice, painting advice, but help them overcome some of those having to put in all those years. I know obviously we all need time and experience and hours, but what if you could do certain things over again and do them differently? Is there anything you would give us?
Well, I don't know if they're do anything differently or not. I guess one of the things is that I started late. So when we came down here to Arizona, I was 40, maybe, 45 years old, I think. Anyway, I was between 40 and 42 or 43 years old when we moved down here. And that's, I wish I had started 10 years earlier. And I think that would, I've been I think at the peak where, I could say, 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, when I was at the peak, working and doing a lot of workshops and going to these PleinAir events. If I would have been 10 years younger, I could have sustained that for a longer period of time. But you can't go back. But
and the fact is you got there. I mean, a lot of people don't even get there.
Exactly. But I was lucky. I was very lucky because of this deal with the apartment stores. But you never know. I mean, you never know what kind of things happen to you. And somebody told me one time about how do you know when you're ready for something to happen? And it's like standing on a corner with your bags packed, waiting for somebody to come along and pick you up. And there's something to that. If you are good enough, I think people will see your work and they make recommendations, or they say, you know what, I've got an idea. Let's do this. Or would you be interested in doing that? And so because of that initial push that I got by going to and doing demonstration paintings at the diamond stores down here when I first moved down here, I got people say to me, how would you like to do some illustration work for Arizona highways? I said, I'd love to. I said, okay, this is what the article is about, and you do some illustrations. So I got some illustrations in Arizona highways, and I got some illustrations in some of the art magazines in the Valley. And so those are the things that happened because you were out there, because you're out there. But you have to be out there. You have to be out there where people can see your work.
I think there's another element to it, too. Not only do you have to put yourself out there, but as you tell these stories, you said yes every time. The only time you didn't say yes was the first time you were invited to Catalina.
That's right.
And I think sometimes, again, that lack of confidence that creeps in, you sometimes you don't feel worthy. I have people who have said to me, I don't think I'm ready or worthy to come to the PleinAir convention, for instance. And it's like,
right. Yeah,
everybody's worthy. Just come. But our self-talk gets in the way. So just say yes, right?
Exactly. It's really interesting because so many times you don't know what kills your inspiration, but sometimes it's just somebody ignoring what you do. Somebody, and it could be a spouse. I mean, somebody that just ignores what you do. Not my spouse. My spouse helps me a lot. I mean, without Darlene, I don't know what I would do. But so you have to have somebody that's understanding and somebody that encourages you along the way. So it's not just a one-shot deal, but encouragement along the way, and it keeps you excited, keeps you pumped up, keeps you wanting to paint, wanting to do more. And I think that's one of the things that I have found for me. I've been lucky, but we live in a retirement community, now. And so what happens is, like, I try to be encouraging to the people that are coming to my workshops. So it's my turn. It's my turn now to encourage these people, get them out there on location and let them paint, and then come back with a head of steam and say, wow, that was so much fun. This is what I want to do. And already they've got an exciting idea about their painting. And I think that's the thing that makes people want to come back and paint and continue to paint. And I always tell my people in workshop, I want you to go home wanting to paint. I want you to go home and be excited about painting, and I want you to paint. And they come back time after time after time. And they say, boy, I've been working and working. And I think, let me show you some of the pieces I've done. And they'll bring them in, and we talk about them. And I think it's so exciting to see. In my position now, I've lost a lot of relevance as far as the big art scene is concerned because of my age, and I'm not showing anymore and all that sort of thing. But now it's my job to pass that excitement on to other people. And that's what I try to do.
You've got it all wrong. You have just as much relevance today. It's just that your role has changed.
Maybe. Well, may be.
You know, if you look throughout art history and the importance of people who are in the role you're in now, you're not only still painting, but you're passing it on. You're giving the encouragement. That's a very important role. I mean, if it wasn't for the people who had spent their lives learning and then being willing to share it, I mean, a lot of us would be nowhere. So don't discount that. You were very relevant.
Well, I appreciate that. I guess you think about that yourself. I think about that, the relevance of, because when you're not out there all the time, I think I had a really good watercolor painting friend. He was from Taiwan, and after he left, he went back to Taiwan as he was older, but he was an excellent painter, and he did a lot of painting on location, and he did wonderful paintings. And now Paul Kuo is his name, Paul Kuo, and you never hear his name anymore. You just sort of fade away. And occasionally you'll see a painting of his, maybe in an estate sale or something like that, and that's about it, But I don't know if that's, and maybe that's okay.
Well,
maybe that's okay.
Certainly, it's okay if that's what you want, and I teach marketing to a lot of people, and one of the things I oftentimes bring up is that there are people who wish they continued to be relevant, but they weren't following the practices that made them relevant. And then there are people who don't care to be doing the shows and living that 35 shows a year. I think you did 35 shows in 1 year, right, according to my notes. And I mean, that's grueling. That's really tough work. And there's a season for getting out there, and there's a season. There are a lot of painters I know who are dropping off the plein air circuit now because they've been doing it for 10 years. And now they want to do larger studio works and start focusing on these monumental pieces that are going to make their careers in a different way. And so they've moved out of that one season, or they want to spend time with their families, and they could, or they didn't have families at the time. So everything's about seasons, I think.
Yeah, I think that you're right. And I think that each person has to look at themselves and say, this is what I want. This is where I'm at now. And maybe this is the direction I should go. So each person has to make that decision, I think. And there's a lot of ways. I think there's a lot of different ways. There's, a lot of people use the internet and their websites and things like that. And I have a website too, but I don't really maintain it probably as well as I should. But and there's a lot of other things that I think artists do to bring more relevance to their work and that sort of thing as they get older. But I guess maybe for me, maybe the teaching is the thing that I like and that keeps me going more than anything.
Yeah, well, I think it's a perfect time in life to be able to do that. Just for everybody's benefit, your website is KinneyWatercolors.com. It's KINNEY watercolors.com.
That's correct.
Well, Raleigh, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation to have with you. Our time is kind of drawing near and to the end, and And it's just been a pleasure to reconnect with you. And as I told you before we recorded, I'm going to be in Arizona, and I'm going to try to give you a call, and maybe we'll go break bread.
That would be fun. That would be fun. Very interesting. Yeah.
Well, again, any final thoughts for everybody while I got you on?
The only thing, I guess what I try to say with my paintings more than anything, and right now, I think my paintings are a conversation with me and to whom it may concern. I think it has a lot to do with the celebration of natural and man-made shapes, and I really enjoy that sort of approach, I think, to my painting. And sometimes it's a little more abstract, and it's based more on emotion, I think, and some of it is maybe a little bit more visual or more defined, I suppose. But I sort of like a combination of the two. I like a little of abstraction, but also at the same time, I like people to understand what they're looking at. And so that's kind of what my idea of my own painting is concerned. And I've learned an awful lot from the painters that I've taken workshops from and that sort of thing. And I use a lot of those techniques and a lot of those things in my own work down through the years.
A lot of good lessons. Always be learning and studying and growing and taking workshops and watching videos and, anything you can to learn. Always say yes.
Yeah, always say yes.
And get out there. Get out there.
And get out there. Yeah. Yep.
Well, thank you again for being on the PleinAir Podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. I really appreciate it. Very much.
Well, thank you again to Raleigh Kinney. What a nice man. What a good painter. How about some marketing ideas?
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
In the Marketing Minute, I try to answer your art marketing questions, and you can email me, eric@artmarketing.com, or you can send me a note on Facebook or whatever, Instagram. Here's a question from Sue in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, which is right outside of West Palm Beach, and I only know that, Sue, because I used to live there in Palm Beach Gardens over in the Hunt Club. She says, I've just begun participating in a few local plein air events and quick draws, and my paintings have been sold occasionally. Since improving the quality of our artwork is an important part of marketing, which of the following do you believe would be the most helpful part of an improvement plan for 2020, even though I'd like to do all of them? Number 1 is travel to attend a highly regarded workshop. Number 2 is to attend PACE in Denver, the Plein Air Convention. Number 3 is to use the funds to purchase top quality art instruction videos. Number 4, something else. Well, Sue, I got to tell you, it's a loaded question. I can't honestly answer objectively because I produced the Plein Air Convention and I produce hundreds of art instruction videos. So of course, I'm going to tell you that's what you should do. But that may not be what you should do. Let me just give you a lowdown on that. Convention makes you part of a bigger community. It's a great way to meet folks, but it's also a chance to sample lots of instructors so that you know how good their workshops are going to be. You get to watch them do demos. So you can kind of go from room to room to room and watch all these different demos and then choose who you want to go study with, whether it's at a workshop or something more extensive if they happen to be in your area. Regarding the videos, most of our videos are really pretty long. Some of them are 8, 9, 10, 12, 15 hours. I mean, we really get every brush stroke, and that's kind of what you would get in a workshop, in a workshop demo over 2 or 3 days. You might not get that much. So that's a good way because you can rewind and rewatch and practice alongside, and that's a good thing too. Plus, for the price of a convention or a workshop, you can get a lot of videos. So that's an option for you. I think there's no substitute for being live. Getting personal attention is always good, having people help you. At the Plein Air Convention, for instance, we have all these mentors who are walking around when you're painting and helping you out. And of course, if you're new to plein air painting, we've got the basics course, which starts a day before the convention, kind of gives you the whole lowdown and everything. So that's good. But the other option for you, Sue, is you might want to try like the Armory Arts Center there in West Palm Beach. They've got a lot of really good painters who teach. Also, the Lighthouse Center has a lot of great painters, and there's probably a lot of other stuff around there now since I lived there. But that's a good way, study locally. It's not going to necessarily be as expensive. You can do it week after week. And I think there's a lot of value in that because, you're working with somebody and you're learning, practicing during the week and going back after a week or so. And I did that for many, many years. And I think that's a really great way to learn too. So there's lots of options for you. So I hope that's been helpful. Remember, don't overthink everything. Sometimes you're ready to get out there and start marketing yourself. Sometimes you're not. You need to get a pro to give you an opinion, maybe get a couple. They'll tell you the truth if you ask them to tell you the truth. And remember that we all tend to overthink making things perfect when, sometimes you're good enough to get out there or you're ready to get out there and you should just get out there. Action wins every time over thought. Both are important, but action is where the money is made. If you're all about making money, you got to get out there. The next question comes from someone we don't know because they didn't leave their name. I'm not sure how, but it comes from social media. It says, I paint portraits occasionally and primarily for juried exhibitions. I can't read today. Recently, I was offered a commission, 36 by 24, with the subjects being 3 portraits in one composition. My question is not one of execution, but how much do I charge for this commission? Commissions I typically receive are for still life or landscape paintings. Portraits are a whole different matter. I'm welcome to all suggestions, and I thank you. Well, anonymous, it's kind of an impossible question for me to answer because I don't know your normal price range, and I don't know your market, and I don't know what people are used to paying for you, etc. But typically, portraits take a lot more time. If you do a landscape and you move a tree or the tree's not perfect, nobody whines. But if the eyes are wrong or they're out of alignment, everybody's going to whine. Because the process of a portrait commission usually involves sketching something out, getting that approved, maybe doing a preliminary, sketching that out, getting that approved, getting different pieces of money at different times. Portraiture takes a lot more time in that respect on top of actually having to make it. So, and also in this particular case, you have 3 portraits, not just 1 portrait. So you've got a lot more work involved. And so I would think, you would have a standardized price for a portrait, and then for every additional person, you're going to add a certain amount of money for it. Remember the saying, that'll cost you an arm and a leg? Well, and that came from the portrait business. In the portrait business, it was if you wanted just a head and shoulders, that was one price. If you wanted one arm and a hand in it, that was another price. If you wanted 2 arms and a hand in it, if you wanted a leg in it, you wanted a full body, that was another price. So that's where that will cost you an arm and a leg came from. So you can kind of set up, what you would charge, because quite frankly, if you're painting a whole body, it's a whole different than painting a face, etc. So keep that in mind. So the thing about pricing your work, I think that pricing your work really boils down to this. It really kind of works out to how much do you need every year and how much can you sell a year? So if you need $100K a year and you can sell 10 paintings a year, then in reality, you need to sell them for 10 grand a painting, right? And of course, that's easier said than done because you kind of build up your reputation, you got to get known and so on, build a collector base. But that's kind of how it works. And remember, your prices will never go up as long as you have too much for sale. I got this advice from an art gallery recently who said, if I go to a website and this artist has got 50 paintings on their website for sale, there's no scarcity. I don't feel like they're important. But if they have 3 for sale or 4 for sale, then I feel like maybe it's a little bit more scarce and a little bit more important. And he suggested that you never have a lot of paintings out there. And he also suggested you take all the sold paintings off your website because they can't get them anyway. It'll just frustrate people. I don't know if I agree with that, but that was his thought, and he might be right. But scarcity is an important principle of all marketing, and prices rarely go up without scarcity. Scarcity is like something that nobody can have. Everybody wants what nobody can have. The reason a Rolls Royce or a Maybach costs so much more money is because very few people can afford them. And of course, they're very specialized. They take a lot of extra effort. And so, they're scarce. The reason that, Howard Turpinning paintings sell for over $1 million is because he probably only does one or two of them a year, maybe one a year. I don't know how many he's doing anymore. But the idea is that you want to be scarce. You want to have people who are clamoring to get what you've got. I've got a friend out west, I won't use names, he sells 4 paintings a year. And he gets about $250,000 a painting. So he's making $1 million. He doesn't even have a gallery involved. And everybody knows his stuff is so good and so rare and so special that they'll pay that kind of money, the people who collect that kind of art, which happens in this case to be Western art. So anyway, I hope that gives you a feel for things. I'm not so sure I answered your question, but I'm trying to help. Anyway, that's the Marketing Minute.
This has been the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads. You can learn more at artmarketing.com.
Well, a reminder, if you want to get into the PleinAir convention in May in Denver, I think it's the first week of Denver, you want to make sure that you get those tickets because there's not very many left. That's pleinairconvention.com. If you're looking for Christmas ideas, try easelbrushclip.com. There's a good video in there. You can kind of see how it all works. And if you've not seen my blog on Sunday mornings where I just talk about life, philosophy, all kinds of things, check it out. It's called Sunday Coffee. And you can find it at coffeewitheric.com. I do it most Sundays, like, a week ago or 2 weeks ago. I just didn't feel like doing it, so I didn't do it. So once in a while, I just kind of take a day off. But normally I do it. Well, this is always fun. Thank you for listening to the PleinAir Podcast. I'll see you next week. In the meantime, I'm Eric Rhoads, founder and publisher of PleinAir Magazine. Remember, it's a big world out there. Go paint it. We'll see you. Bye.
This has been the PleinAir Podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhoads. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.